Well, first of all, Russians are very good liars. So that's number one. Number two, if you have a camp with children, but you don't have their legal guardians or their parents and you cannot speak to them, I think you as an investigative journalist can actually be critical and ask yourself or ask them the question, where is the written document? Where do you have the signed declaration of the parents that the children should be here? I don't know where you're from, but where I'm from, a child doesn't go away from their home without parents agreeing to that in a written form with a clear timeline when children should be back and how they will come back.
Ezra Levant here for Rebel News. This is the second time I've come to the Ukraine Pavilion at the World Economic Forum. Behind me, a map of Ukraine by different province, or oblast as they're called. You can see the number of wounded or killed civilians. 120 years ago, my family came from Dnipropetrovsk. I'm glad that we're safe and sound in Canada and not in a horrific war that has seen hundreds of thousands dead on both sides. Vladimir Zelensky is attending the World Economic Forum. I understand he was in the Swiss capital yesterday, but he'll be in Davos today speaking in the main conference center. I'm in the Ukraine Pavilion, which is one of those sort of trade fair-like kiosks that line the promenade in Davos. Very high security this year, as it won't surprise you to learn. We went through an airport-style metal detector, and I just feel that security for the entire Davos conference is a little bit higher. There was a helicopter right overhead as we came in. Lots of police and military on the streets, but in Canada there was a lot last year too. A year has gone by and I feel an enormous change in the Ukraine file. When I was here last year, the theme of this pavilion was war crimes prosecutions against Russia and reparations, the idea of seizing hundreds of billions of dollars of assets from the Russian Federation and using them to rebuild Ukraine. Here's a conversation I had with a war crimes lawyer last year at the pavilion, just to give you a flavor of where the front line in the legal and political battle was 1 year ago. That any conclusion will likely have to be negotiated politically with Russia. What would you say to that counterpoint? Tell me if I'm wrong, tell me if I'm right.
I think in an ordinary situation, even a ordinary bad situation, the end point is usually some type of negotiated settlement. The thing is, this isn't an ordinary situation. Since 1945, with the possible exception of Saddam Hussein's Iraq invading and attempting to destroy Kuwait, there's been nothing remotely like this. And since 1945, the world, including the world economy, have benefited enormously from the consensus that one country shall not use force to change the boundaries of another country. You don't do that under the modern settlement that we reached after 1945. Took a long time to get there.
But Iran, Iraq, Morocco, Algeria, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia. I mean, I could, at least just off the top of my head, I could probably name, well, I mean, Vietnam, Korea. I mean, since 1945, there's probably been 100 wars that change boundaries. I mean, I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm just trying to understand how this is legally different, and I'm looking forward to your answer.
You're actually wrong. There's been nothing remotely like this, with the possible exception of Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. An established boundary, a settled boundary, challenged by force with a declared, under the law of the aggressor, a declared annexation. This is Hitler stuff.
Well, a year has gone by and so much has changed. One thing that has changed is the appetite among Western countries for military and financial donations to Ukraine has withered, and it's no secret that Vladimir Zelensky himself is upset about this. He has repeatedly asked the West for funding, and there's some fairness to it, as we now learn that over a year ago there was a kind of tentative peace agreement negotiated in principle with Russia, but NATO, especially in the person of Boris Johnson, told Zelensky not to take it. So the West, in a way, insisted that Zelensky continue to fight. Here's the U.S. White House spokesman saying he would not accept any ceasefire because that would crystallize Russian gains.
That if coming out of this meeting, there's some sort of call for a ceasefire, well, that's just going to be unacceptable, because all that's going to do, Mike, is ratify Russia's conquest to date. All that's going to do is give Mr. Putin more time to refit, retrain, reman, and try to plan for renewed offensives at a time of his choosing. We hope, and we've said this before, that President Xi will call and talk to President Zelensky, because we believe the Chinese need to get the Ukrainian perspective here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that militarily a lot has changed. For example, the counteroffensive by Ukraine was not as successful as hoped for. And as I mentioned before, the financial situation has changed. An enormous loss of life in Ukraine. I understand from reports that the average age of the Ukrainian soldier is in the 40s, an entire generation of young men lost. And the impact of this pavilion is to show the human cost of that. As soon as you walk in, you see horrific images of the both military and civilian toll, and that's what this map behind me is, and that was similar to last year, and it felt like it was documenting in real time the horrors of war. Last year, the talk was of prosecuting Russia for war crimes, but the latest reports are that Zelensky is in Switzerland, along with Emmanuel Macron, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and other world leaders, to essentially ask them to assist in a peace negotiation. At least those are the reports. We'll see what Zelensky says tonight in his speech. I'm going to continue walking through the kiosk, and I may have more. You're the curator for this very powerful exhibition. I'd like to ask you some questions because I don't understand the story behind it. Can you please tell me, who are these children? How were they selected for deportation? And how did it happen?
So all of the children you see here are Ukrainian children who have been deported by Russians, who have been brought to camps, so to speak, and who have been returned to Ukraine because their parents or their legal guardians at personal risk went into Russia to bring them back with documents arguing to the people who are in the camp that this is their child, that the child should be given back to them. And like this, they were brought back to Ukraine.
So how were these children physically taken if they had parents? How were they swept up?
Well, the stories of each child are different. Many of the children were brought to, holiday camps, as they called it, and were never returned.
Some critics say that these people are ethnically Russian, or that they affiliate with Russia as opposed to Ukraine. Is that incorrect?
Completely.
What would you say to those who well, help me understand it then. Help me square the circle. I'm just trying to understand who they are and how it happened. I'm at a loss.
Well, Russians have a genocidal intent in Ukraine. One of the ways to destroy Ukraine is to steal the children. It's, according to the Geneva Convention, one of the acts of genocide. That is exactly what they have been doing. We have reported facts of thousands of children. We don't know about many others because there's not always access. There's testimonies, there's witness statements, there's children themselves who tell these stories. How they do it, that's a different question. The fact that they take them away from their parents, that they take them away from their homes and bring them to Russia to re-educate is a fact.
Can I ask you a question about the estimates ranging from 20 to over 1 million? That's a very wide range. Are there, especially if it's on the larger side of that, are there other international groups like the Red Cross, or I don't know, are there international, is the United Nations looking into this? I'm trying to understand the story behind the art, and I'm relying on you to help me. Are others ringing the alarm on this?
Well, I think it is a public debate internationally. People understand that this is happening. There is outrage about it. And the numbers are difficult. The numbers are difficult because there is no access. If there is access, you can start estimating, you can start looking. We don't have a map like we have downstairs with the war crimes that Russians are committing in Ukraine, simply because we can't make that map because we don't have an access. So we have to work from estimates, we have to work from testimonies, we have to work from what we know.
I have a former colleague who went to Russia, and he saw one of these summer camps, musical camps, and they claimed these were ethnic Russians who wanted to be in Russia. And I don't know, maybe it was propaganda, but the kids seemed happy. Are there any legitimate camps like that, or are you saying that these camps are all sort of a ethnic cleansing? I'm just trying to understand, to square what I saw in those reports with what I'm seeing here, and I'd love any guidance.
Well, first of all, Russians are very good liars. So that's number one. Number two, if you have a camp with children, but you don't have their legal guardians or their parents, and you cannot speak to them, I think you as an investigative journalist can actually be critical and ask yourself, or ask them the question, where is the written document? Where do you have the signed declaration of the parents that the children should be here? I don't know where you're from, but where I'm from, a child doesn't go away from their home without parents agreeing to that in a written form with a clear timeline when children should be back and how they will come back.
I should tell you that we did not air that footage because I was skeptical of it. My colleague aired it later on when he was no longer with our company, but it's been something I've been alert to, I guess, for a year. I don't want to take up any more of your time because I don't think I have any specific questions for you, and you've been very forceful in your answer. And I value the time you've given me, so thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
You know, they say there's no such thing as a dumb question, and I believe in that. If you think it's a dumb question, first of all, someone else probably has that same question they want answered, and the only way to get over your dumbness is to ask the questions. And I really feel like I'm not well armed to understand what's going on here. I'm not sure if you caught it, but I referred to a trip that one of our journalists, former journalist Jeremy Lafredo, made to Russia about a year ago to see what things were like on the inside. For example, he went to grocery stores to see what the price of food was. He went to a gas station to see what the price of gas was. He interviewed ordinary Russians on the street and in a Starbucks and things like that. And Jeremy Lafredo, who's no longer with Rebel News, he's moved on to another network, went to one of these kids' camps, a musical camp. And it was, I think, one of the things they're talking about here. And I saw the video, and it just felt a little bit, it felt like we didn't have both sides of the story. And so as the publisher of Rebel News, I made the decision not to air that video. Now, Jeremy, as I mentioned, left Rebel News and he went on to work for the Gray Zone, and then he later published that footage over there. They have a different editorial approach than we do. But talking to the curator here that you just heard, he suggests some good points. How do you know those kids were there voluntarily? All right, it's a good question. I don't know because I wasn't there. I do know, though, that there are plenty of ethnic Russians in that eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass, Kherson, places like that. I'm not an expert, even though 120 years ago my family was from central Ukraine. The fact that the statistics are not known, estimates range from 20,000 to over 1 million, is quite a range. I'm not here to deny the allegations made by Ukraine because I'm not well enough armed. I really am in the hands of the pavilion here to inform me. I'm not resolved on the issue, but I'm really glad I came here, just like I was last year, and here's why. When you take a political point of view, especially in the world of Twitter, you get so much reinforcement by people who like or retweet what you have to say, and you have a tendency to stay in your own camp, to listen to people on your side and discount people on the other side. And I've condemned Russia's invasion since the very first moments of it, but I've also been a disagreeer for some of the Western approach to it. I feel like the war was elongated by NATO at horrible cost. But I think I have a special duty as a skeptic of the war there to inform myself and to come straight into the heart of the Ukrainian Pavilion and do my best to listen and do my best to ask meaningful and real questions. And when I get an answer, not to dismiss it offhand. It's very difficult, especially when it's so emotionally, such as the idea of children being kidnapped. And I mean, at the same time, we know, for example, that the terrorist group Hamas has kidnapped children, even babies, and holding them. It's just the most horrific, emotional thing in the world. This Ukraine Pavilion, as you heard, perhaps you heard the curator say to another tour group, is an emotional project. It's to touch the heartstrings. The moment you walk into the pavilion, you're faced with gut-wrenching photos of war crimes. And I will admit that it has some effect on me, but I think that's good. I think I should never stop caring about human life. And in every war, there is pain mainly borne by civilians. And I think it's important that I see it, even if it's just once a year, here at the Ukraine Pavilion. Vladimir Zelensky will have some remarks later today. I'll pay attention to those, and I might try and take in a panel discussion here. Listen, that's not the main reason we came to Davos, not at all. We came here to hunt the VVIPs like Albert Bourla, the Pfizer CEO, and Greta Thunberg, and the other people we're catching on the streets. But once a year, I come here to make sure I have a balanced information on this war in Ukraine. You know, the Rebel News motto, telling the other side of the story. It's important that I listen to the other side of the story, too. See all our reports, go to wefreports.com. I'm on the streets of Davos, that's high in the Swiss Alps, for the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. We're not invited. We tried to get accredited. They said no. Fine, we'll do our citizen journalism on the streets. To see all our videos or to chip into our crowdfunding to help get us here, go to wefreports.com.